The US Vice President introduces who she hopes will be the next US Vice President, the intersection of the Olympics and art, and what Olympians see when they watch the Olympics. I'm Andrew Mueller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Welcome to the Monocle Daily live from Paris. I'm Andrew Mueller. Week 2, day 2 of our weekday residency here on the 16th floor of the Sceaux Hotel in the centre of the French capital, taken over for the duration by Maison Allianz, the worldwide insurance partner of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. My guests Cate Campbell, Clément Delépine and Claude will approach the Olympic city from a variety of perspectives, and we'll have the latest from Minnesota as the North Star State contemplates the prospect of its governor being kicked up a rung to vice president. That's all coming up on the Monocle Daily, live from Maison Allianz at the Sceaux Hotel. And welcome to the Monocle Daily live from Paris with me, Andrew Mueller. There are dozens of entire countries which in 128 years of trying have not won as many Olympic medals as our first guest. Australian swimmer Cate Campbell competed at 4 Olympic Games, winning 4 gold medals, 1 silver and 3 bronze, and fell only narrowly short of qualifying for Paris before announcing her retirement from the pool in June. Cate visited our pop-up studio earlier, and I began by asking what it's like coming to the Olympics and not competing.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting coming to an Olympic Games as a spectator for the first time. This is the first time that I've watched an Olympic Games since 2004. So I've competed at the past 4 Olympics. So the last time I sat down and watched an Olympics, it was in Athens. And now here I am on the other side. And I have to tell you, it is so wonderful to be able to see the other side, because when you're an athlete, you're so focused and you live in the Olympic Village and at your competition venue, and that's pretty much it. Whereas here, I'm staying in the heart of Paris and I get to see the city come alive. I get to see how excited everyone is. I get to see all the friends and families of all the athletes coming in to support them, and the real buzz and anticipation that comes along with being in a city that's hosting an Olympic Games. And so it has been a little bit bittersweet. You know, there have definitely been times where I've been at the pool and wished that I was on the other side of the barrier and standing behind the starting blocks, but being able to be in the crowd and cheer on our incredible athletes has been a pretty good consolation prize.
A thing I have always wondered, as somebody who has watched a lot of sport and was absolutely never any good at any of it, is when you've been absolutely very good at it and then you're watching it again, do you think you watch a swimming race differently from how anybody watching the games would watch it? Are you seeing things the rest of us aren't? And if so, are there ways you can explain what they are?
That's a really interesting question. And I would say that yes, because of my many, many years in the sport, I can look at a swimmer and I can tell if they're on, if they're off, if they're starting to hurt, or if they're managing to maintain their pace and their stroke rate. So all of those things, because I'm very used to watching swimming, I can do. It's the same as a tennis commentator who is watching a tennis match and can tell me exactly where Roger Federer went wrong. Not that he was wrong very often, but you know, they can pick up these little intricacies and explain them to us. So yes, I can see it a little bit, but I have had the absolute joy of not having to critique people's events. I have just had the joy of sitting in the stands and watching, and I'm doing a little bit of work with our host broadcaster back in Australia, but my job is to review the final session and recap all the incredible events and sort of highlight all our athletes. So I've been able just to sit back and enjoy the show.
You have, however, managed to insert yourself into the Olympic discourse. You and Michael Phelps have been trading a certain amount of, let's call it badinage, via social media. You have said, and I think you're right, and I have always thought this, that there is nothing wrong with a little bit of trash talk from time to time. Do you think the Olympics and the Olympian ideal that it tries to present does get a little bit prissy about that?
Oh, yes. And look, I think that Australian sense of humour is quite different to American sense of humour. humour, which I had a
So I've been frequently informed.
Very steep learning curve in. Apparently they don't get irony and they're very sincere. And so things that are said in jest can often be misconstrued. They're also intensely patriotic, and apparently where I really went wrong was talking about the Star-Spangled Banner and their national anthem. Now, I admit that it is a great anthem. However, I come from Australia. Our national anthem, Advance Australia Fair, has probably one of the least sexy words in the English language, girt, in it. Our land is girt. It means surrounded.
I think it's also the only context in which that word ever appears.
100%. Like, no one would ever use that. So I can, laugh at our national anthem and still be intensely proud to sing it on top of the podium and still intensely proud of being Australian. However, that didn't translate very well in terms of America. And I do think, though, that our sport is built on rivalries. The Olympic Games is built on rivalries and it's built on competition. It's how we get the best out of ourselves. It's how we push each other and ourselves to our limits. And Australia and the USA has been going toe to toe for many, many years. And they just pipped us at the post in the pool, coming out with 8 gold medals to our 7. But that happened on the final night of competition and it kept everyone hanging on every race because it was like, is this the one that America is going to win and overtake Australia? Because we started out really strong. So it's all in good faith. It's all in good fun. I've reached out to Michael Phelps personally and made sure that there was no beef, and he completely agrees. And I think that it's been a great thing for the sport all round.
Was it always important to you coming up personally, whether as an individual swimmer or part of a team, to have a rival, perhaps even a nemesis?
No. For me, it was about how do I execute my best race to the best of my ability. It wasn't necessarily about beating someone else. It was about beating myself and beating what I had done in the past. And so I think that some people really thrive on those rivalries. I think that the way that the American culture is set up is that they really thrive on those rivalries. Michael Phelps used to read every news article that was ever written about him. And if someone said something negative, he would print it out and he would stick it on his wall and he would use that as motivation. So for some people, that's how they get out of bed in the morning and how they stay motivated. But that was never for me. I think I'm too lazy to hold a grudge. Honestly, training's hard enough. I can't be bothered to hold a grudge. I remember what everyone said about me and try and prove them wrong.
There are very few people, obviously, who get to compete in Olympic Games. Even fewer of those ever get to win any medals. And I know it's a general tendency, I think, for most people to start thinking about what they do for a living as just what they do for a living. This is just what happens. But for somebody who ended up winning 7 Olympic medals, was it?
Might have been 8.
Might have been 8. Definitely 4 of them are gold, though, right?
Yeah.
Does that ever sort of occur to you as just a thing? Does it ever bring you up short, thinking, good Lord, that does seem like quite a lot?
Oh, definitely. And to be honest, if people hadn't been quoting that stat back at me, I'm not sure that I would be able to know those stats just off the top of my head. I dreamt of going to an Olympic Games when I was 9 years old, and I dreamt of going to 1 Olympic Games, and I've been to 4. And the fact that I have been able to represent my country that many times, that I've been able to stand on Olympic podiums that many times, is kind of beyond what even that 9-year-old child could have dreamt. And one of the beautiful things about children is that they have these vast, wild imaginations and they set themselves these lofty goals. It's kind of as we get older and more realistic and a bit more cynical that we put limitations on ourselves. But even that 9-year-old girl couldn't have dreamt that I would be standing here nearly having made 5 Olympics, but having competed at 4 of them. And it's been an incredible journey. And I think it's really interesting, that concept of what defines a person and what defines an athlete, because to reach the top and the pinnacle of anything requires so much dedication and focus. It requires all your time and all your energy and all your thoughts are around how do I get the absolute best out of myself. And so it's really easy to allow your identity to get wrapped up in your performance. And it's really difficult to separate the two. But I think it's important to recognize that the two are different, even if they're entwined while you're in sport, and know that once you're outside of sport, you have to begin to untangle that.
Just finally then, where do you see that kind of energy and that dedication going for you now? Because you probably do realise that unless you, I don't know, invent a time machine or something, the thing that everybody will always introduce you as is four-time Olympic gold medalist. Is it difficult to find another focus?
Yeah, and it's something that I am going to have to be grappling with over the next probably decade of my life. I went to my first Olympic Games when I was 16. I'm now 32, so nearly half of my life I've been an Olympian. And so I will probably be figuring out what that looks like for the next half of my life, really. We have this really beautiful saying in Australia that once you're an Olympian, you're always an Olympian, and that is a title that you can wear proudly for the rest of your life. And I want to wear that proudly, but I don't want to be defined by it. So the next couple of years are going to be about figuring out where my passions are, where I want to put my energy. Just immediately now, it's going to be into my friends and family. Being an elite athlete is one of the most selfish things you can do with your life. Like literally, my whole world revolved around me, and therefore the whole world of my loved ones also revolved around me. It was like I could see them on my schedule. I had very little flexibility. And so now I want to be able to make sure that I can go to their birthdays and their weddings, that I can catch up with them for drinks on Friday night or whatever it is. I feel like I've spent enough time and energy on myself. In the next immediate year, it's going to be spending it on the people who have helped get me to this point.
That was the quadruple Olympic gold medalist Cate Campbell speaking to me earlier. This is the Monocle Daily live from Paris with me, Andrew Mueller, and we will have more from Paris very shortly, but now to the United States, where Vice President Kamala Harris has announced who she would like to succeed her in the job. It is Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota. Walz, who has served in his present role since 2019, is a former congressman, Army reservist, school teacher, and high school football coach, taking the Mankato West Scarlets to a state championship in 1999. I'm joined with more on this by Anna Radelat, Washington, D.C. correspondent for MinnPost, an independent non-profit newsroom covering Minnesota's civic and cultural affairs. Anna, first of all, is this going to come as much of a surprise to Minnesotans in particular? Because Governor Walz was not among the early favourites. A few weeks ago, you could have written your own odds.
That's true. This is a come-from-behind victory, I guess. But I think Minnesotans, they've already had two vice presidential candidates. They had Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale. So in a way, I don't think they were as surprised as you might think.
Hubert and Humphrey and Walter Mondale, though neither exactly propitious omens, at least if you look at what happened to them subsequently. But Minnesota, according to most polls, is already probably in the bag for Kamala Harris. So what do you think would have been the decision-making process if it came down to him versus Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania, a state she very much needs to win?
The other candidates had baggage. That's what part of the problem was. The progressives in the party turned against Shapiro because they did not like some of his stances, although he disavowed some of them, on Israel. And also the labor unions did not like some of his stances on labor issues. So same thing with Senator Kelly of Arizona, who was also a top contender. Labor unions did not like some of Senator Kelly's positions on labor.
So where would Vice President Harris see Walz's strengths? What does she think he brings to the ticket?
He's an everyman, and he was the only candidate that would not divide what she's got right now, which is complete unity across the Democratic spectrum, from the progressives to the more conservative Democrats.
Is it also possible she was thinking of, trying to pick a diametric opposite to the current Republican vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance? If we think that someone like Tim Walz is about as average a Midwestern American as you could possibly hope to find running against, to borrow Tim Walz's own words, an obvious weirdo like J.D. Vance, do they think that might work for them?
Yes, of course. He is a counterweight to Vance because he also can claim that he comes from a small town and has rural roots. So, yes, that is another benefit to Walz's candidacy.
What can we glean about Governor Walz from his time as governor of Minnesota? He does seem to have at least above water approval ratings from Minnesotans. So if you asked Minnesotans who like him what they like about him, what would they tell you?
I think they like him because of his, folksy demeanor, his ability to get things done. He has a reputation in the state as a hard worker, and he's always been accessible. He goes to the state fair with his daughter and, mingles with the crowd. He works on his cars. He does things that Minnesotans do. Minnesotans are, by and large, very plain-spoken and down-to-earth people.
They will obviously, the Harris campaign, that is, have gone through his background, well, at least one hopes they have, with the proverbial fine-tooth comb. What potential weaknesses / skeletons in the closet, if any, are there where Governor Walz is concerned?
Well, they're going to attack him on several fronts. One, of course, because of the riots that were hard to control after George Floyd was killed. They're going to attack him for a very progressive agenda that was implemented by the state legislature a couple of years ago. They're going to, Tim Walz at one point had a drinking problem. He stopped a long time ago. They will probably bring up some of those problems.
And speaking
They're
from...
going to paint him as a very, very, very out-of-touch progressive governor. But in reality, he's a lot more moderate than they paint him. And he was one of the more moderate voices in Congress when he served in Congress.
Speaking from where you are in Washington, D.C., though, and given what we were saying about how he has kind of come from the clouds to end up on a presidential ticket, does he have any recognition at national level at all? Do we know, for example, what he thinks about the stuff that presidents and vice presidents have to think about, specifically foreign policy?
That's probably somewhere that he needs a little bit of help. But all of the top contenders, Governor Shapiro, Senator Kelly, they did not have great foreign policy experience either. As far as national stature, Walz is the head of the Democratic Governors Association. So, he spent quite a bit of time in Washington, too, in the last couple of years. Well, in the last year, as he's been the head of that association.
Anna Radelat at MinnPost, thank you very much for joining us. You are listening to the Daily live from Paris, and any Olympic city hopes to draw attention to its virtues beyond whatever aptitude it may have displayed for hosting shot putting. Paris has obviously more to show off about than most Olympic hosts, not least a tradition of distinctive pop music, one current practitioner of which joins us now, Claude. Just Claude?
Just Claude.
Welcome to our studio. I am going to start by asking you what I've been asking a lot of guests, just basically to show off about the view. Can we in fact see your house from up here?
Probably. I haven't looked for it, but it's quite certain. Like I can see the whole city right now, so probably somewhere. Yeah. Yes, I'm waving my hand. For
the benefit of our listeners, Claude is gesturing vaguely over the river. I think in a sort of, is that south? I've no idea which direction we're looking in. This has been incredibly unhelpful radio.
Yeah.
But let's try and talk about something we can talk about on the air, specifically the Olympics. And we've also been asking the Parisians who visited us up here how the games have been for them, because there does seem to be this quite common thing that everybody was dreading it for years, and now that it's happened, it's actually been really pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought before the Olympics, I thought I hated it, and I thought I wouldn't care for it. But on the opening ceremony, I was in the bar with some friends. I didn't want to look the opening ceremony, but people started clapping and cheering, and then I looked, and it was great. It was very beautiful, very fun, very creative. I clapped. It was fun, and then I looked like a lot of games, a lot of French people gaining medals and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm pretty enthusiastic.
It's nice to hear, because the opening ceremony in particular has been quite controversial. There are still pockets of the world arguing about it, which I guess is a mark in its favour. But which bits of it did you like? Did you like the really sort of... Because I really got into it around the completely insane revolutionary stuff with the headless Marie Antoinette choristers and so on.
I liked it a lot. Like that part was very, very French. And on what pertains to me, like... regarding the music, it was like great music. Like it was a guy called Victor Leman who made all the music pieces from that opening ceremony, and it was absolutely magnificent. So the metal revolutionary stuff was great. When the French on the huge boat came like at dawn, it was at dawn, that's the right word. It was absolutely magnificent. The dancing on the scene was a bit weird. I thought, but it was raining, so it was extremely hard. So then I thought like it's actually quite convincing for
slippery underfoot.
Yeah, they had to be quite careful, and I was quite convinced by that too. And then the last show on the Eiffel Tower with Serron, who was playing, which is a French music legend of electronic music, and there was like a light show on the Eiffel Tower, and then big fan of that as well.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned French electronic music, because, of course, that is pretty much your realm.
Yeah.
As we will shortly be hearing, you do choose to sing in French, and there's no reason why anybody shouldn't. It sounds lovely. But is it difficult to maintain, I guess, any kind of fealty to a specific French pop aesthetic when you're working in a field which is absolutely dominated by English and American voices?
I think you just have to find your segment in some ways. Like you can't convince the whole world and every single people that your music is good and that they will enjoy it. So you have to find a segment, and in my opinion, you have to start like with something that is very niche, and then convince more people that they will like it. So I'm pretty like good with the fact that I'm not going to speak to sing in English or to write in English, because I'm not capable of doing it, because as you all hear, I'm not very good at it. But But
when you think of the influences that you've drawn upon as you've developed as a musician, have they mostly been French influences?
No, weirdly, absolutely not. I didn't enjoy, and I still don't enjoy, like chanson française, which is like French singing, but it's like a specific genre of French music, very lyrical and of the 50s, 60s, 70s. My influences are mostly English, British, and American. And right now from Fontaine DC to I don't know, to Idols, and even for the French, my influences are mostly English-speaking French, like Daft Punk and stuff like that. So, that's a bit weird.
Has it been a bit bemusing then? Especially I've noticed when English language critics trying to get to grips with your music have sort of, I think, scraped together whatever other French musicians they can possibly think of. The Jacques Brel card seems to get played a lot. I do realise he was Belgian.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So you mean like the way people frame what I do? I think that it's for everything it's always the same. Like every journalist and media is trying to. It's normal. It's you're trying to convey the message of an artist, but you have to try to find influences, even if they are not like Jacques Brel is not an influence for me at all. I think it is one of the greatest French singer and writer there is. Like he is an absolute legend, but I didn't listen to his music like a lot growing up. So, but I know, like, because I roll the R when I sing. Sometimes, not a lot, but sometimes, journalists are often like trying to to create a link like, oh, he sings like Jacques Brel, but it's just that I do it like I don't do it on purpose, and it's.
Okay, well, we can now demonstrate to our listeners how very unlike Jacques Brel you do sound. We have a clip of a track of yours. This is Eau de Marque. Introduce it for us, if you would.
So Eau de Marque is a love song for Mark Zuckerberg. So yeah, it's about like being always on your phone or on your laptop and having your whole life like exposed on social media, and yeah.
Okay, well, let's hear some of it.
Marque, tu me connais par cœur, mais tu en as des milliards comme moi, et comme moi ils t'aiment. Dis-moi, fais-je la différence? Ou est-ce qu'on se ressemble tous? Est-ce qu'on t'indiffère?
Eau de Marque there by our current guest standing right here in our pop-up studio, Claude, and I think we can all agree, and all our listeners can agree, sounds absolutely nothing like Jacques Brel. But
not very Jacques Brel.
But on the subject matter in particular, which is social media, is it, especially for a musician now, do you kind of end up resenting how dependent musicians have to be on it?
Yeah, maybe a bit, but that's just part of the job. Like everyone, every artist creator has to get on social media and defend his work. So it's just part of the game, and you have to get used to it. So yeah, I resent it a bit because sometimes it's a lot, and you have to do like a lot of things that are not nearly close to music creation or to creativity, but it's just part of the game. So I'm doing it like anyway.
Okay, well, finally then, we can do some old school plugging for whatever you have coming up next, because we are on radio, which is a very old school medium. What do you have coming up? Are there imminent new records, imminent new shows?
So I have my first album out in October, and I have my first big gig in Paris at La Cigale on the 18th of November.
That's a fantastic venue.
Yeah, it's great venue, great sound, and I can't wait.
Claude, thank you very much
Thank you very much.
Joining us. You are listening to The Daily, live from Paris on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's show, there is a long history of the visual arts drawing inspiration from sport. The museums of Greece, for example, are stacked floor to ceiling with jugs depicting ancient discus wangers. This October, Art Basel will be furthering this tradition with a special exhibition staged in an Olympic venue, Le Grand Palais, and the Olympic City more generally. Well, earlier I spoke to Clément Delépine, director of Art Basel Paris, and I began by asking whether the spirit of the Olympic Games is inspiring creatives with a renewed enthusiasm for expressing athletics and sport through art.
In light of the Paris Olympic Games, I mean, we've seen indeed a renewed interest in the exploration of sports and the challenges and celebration, that tend to accompany the competition. I mean, I'm thinking like, for instance, of an artist like Melvin Nesbitt Jr., who's a paper collage from 2023 portray like games of pickup basketball in public housing communities, similar to the one, that he grew up in. Thinking of like another artist like Dario Escobar, for instance, utilizes everyday objects and specifically used footballs to highlight social inequalities, creating his work, to do so. I mean, it's interesting to notice that artists tend to question sports and athleticism, and as a vector of social inclusion or integration. In Paris, for instance, at the moment, we have an exhibition by Matthew Barney at the Fondation Cartier, which is themed around the story of Darrell Stingley, who was I'm not so familiar with the typologies of American football, but I think he was a player in the team of the New England Patriots. And he was tackled pretty aggressively and left paralyzed as a result. And, Matthew Barney himself was also an American football player, and questioning the story of that man in the broader context of sports and art making, and how, for instance, the fact that, many players are left with concussions, and how the sport as a spectacle can also have a debilitating effect, So long story short, yes, indeed, we've seen a renewed interest.
Is there something new there in that more, I guess, inquiring approach to sport by artists? Because, of course, art has been representing or celebrating athletics at least since the Greeks built all those heroic statues of discus throwers.
Yes, I mean, indeed, of course. It's also a way, like when they question sports as a vector of social integration and inclusion. It's also a way for them to explore, like notions of identity, society, race as well, and psychological aspect of athletics. I mean, discipline, those like values also associated with sport. It's one way to elevate yourself in a way and break social reproduction. So this is like a very interesting playground for artists.
Let's talk a bit about the intersection of Art Basel and Paris. The bulk of Art Basel in Paris, as I understand it, will be held at what is going to be an Olympic venue, the Grand Palais. Beyond that, do you imagine that the exhibits will refer much to the Olympics, or do you kind of hope Paris might have moved on by then?
No, I mean, I think the Olympics will leave a lasting imprint, on the city of Paris, not only from an infrastructural standpoint, but one must remember the pitch for the Olympics was made by the city of Paris shortly after the terrorist attacks in 2015, and there was this idea that a signal to be sent to the world that Paris was again welcoming and open to receive international audiences. Yes, the Grand Palais will be the site of Olympic fencing and taekwondo. I don't expect an echo per se at the fair, but within the public program, we have an installation that should actually pay homage to the Olympics in the sense that it will highlight the portrait of a Greek god, Apollo, who was the god that engineered the encounter of culture and sports.
There's one particular exhibit that I feel like I have to ask you about. This is the splendidly titled Ooh La La exhibition. What is that actually going to contain, other than giving people the opportunity to visit Paris and actually say Ooh La La without upsetting anybody?
Well, it's exactly what the purpose is, It's actually, whether you visit the fair on Wednesday or on Saturday or Sunday, or, you're not visiting the same show, basically. It's really the Heraclitean principle. You don't enter the same river twice because galleries are rehanging a lot. You would encounter many masterpieces on the weekend. But I think it's an effort that's under-celebrated, and we just wish to accompany the galleries that plan new installings and new hangings for the publics, because Friday, Saturday, Sunday are public days. And basically, we want to give them special accrued visibility and, celebrate the effort into rehanging the booth and making sure, that the fair presents itself anew every day. So Ooh La La is kind of a play on the redundancy of the sound, ooh la la, a repetition of the syllable, but also something très French because it has for now no equivalent in the other Art Basel shows. And it's meant to be also a humorous take on the fair itself, because we thought that the first themed parcours could be also themed around love, for instance. So it's a little cheesy, but also very serious at the same time, naturally.
But if you could give us a sense, and we are a few months out, obviously, and there are the Olympics to get dealt with first, but Art Basel, it won't be just the Grand Palais. How ambitious are you for bringing in the entire city?
The Grand Palais itself is a very beautiful and iconic venue, but it's limited in terms of size. And there is the fair, of course, but I feel although I wouldn't compare the fair Art Basel to a museum, certainly not, I feel we have a responsibility, an institutional responsibility to address also audiences beyond the walls of Grand Palais and to embrace as wide as possible. So in partnership with the city of Paris and many public and private institutions, we've worked on an expanded public program that spans across the city. So you will have monumental sculptures and art installations on view gratuitously and open to all on Place Vendôme, on Avenue Winston Churchill, Palais d'Iéna, many iconic places of patrimony in Paris. And basically the goal is also to, in a way, produce productive tensions, between the art given in the public space and the confrontation with a public, not necessarily familiar with contemporary art or modern art, and see, what the conversation could be.
And just finally and quickly, it would be remiss not to ask, obviously, I think a lot of attendees at the Olympics, perhaps people visiting Paris for the first time, will want to see some of the galleries that people go to Paris to see in non-Olympic times. But is there one you would recommend in particular, ideally a non-obvious one that people may not have read about in their guidebooks?
Well, if I am to recommend a non-obvious one, I think I would like to highlight the presence of a young gallery in our upcoming Emergence sector in 24. The gallery's name is XOXO, which is also a very inviting moniker. And they present the work of the French artist Lou Fourou, an artist who's exploring a future in which the internet has disappeared. And I feel it is at the same time a very fear-inducing, but also very relieving prospect.
That was Clément Delépine, Director of Art Basel Paris, and that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our guests today, Cate Campbell, Clément Delépine and Claude. Today's show was produced by Laura Kramer. Our sound engineer was David Stevens, with assistance from Sarah Nichol in London. I'm Andrew Mueller here in Paris. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow, live from Maison Allianz at the So Hotel. Thanks for listening.